Okay, picture this. It's May 2011. A guy named Dan Saunders is standing in a five-star hotel room staring out the window. Down below, he sees police lights flashing, and his hands, they just won't stop shaking. Because just 4 months earlier, this guy was a totally broke bartender living in a tiny town. But then, he stumbled onto something that honestly sounds impossible, a literal blind spot in the global banking system. In this explainer, we're going to break down exactly how Dan found an actual, real-life, infinite money glitch, how he managed to exploit it for $1.6 million, and the incredible, crushing psychological toll of living a life built entirely on phantom cash.
But before we get into it, I want you to really put yourself in his shoes for a second. Think about it. What would you do if an ATM just kept giving you cash, no matter what your actual bank balance said? Would you pay off your rent, maybe grab a nice dinner, and then just walk away? Or would you keep pushing that button just to see how deep the rabbit hole goes? Keep that in the back of your mind as we go through this, because human temptation, that is at the absolute core of this entire story.
So to really understand how this happened, we have to rewind to a warm February night in 2011. We're in Wangaratta, Australia, which is this quiet country town miles away from any big city lights. Dan is 29 years old. He works as a bartender, and he is completely, flat out broke. It's around midnight, he's a little tipsy after having a few beers, and honestly, he just wants to pull out enough cash to catch a cab home. He slides his worn-out bank card into an ATM, knowing full well he barely has a dime to his name. But instead of getting that standard insufficient funds warning we all dread, he gets this really weird error. The screen says balance unavailable at this time. It flickers, flashes a balance of $342, and then just goes away. Now, maybe it was a little liquid courage, but Dan decides to try something pretty bold. Let's call it the phantom transfer. He uses the ATM menu to try and transfer $200 from his credit account over to his basically empty savings account. He hits confirm, the machine whirs for a second, and then spits his card back out with a new message, transaction canceled. No receipt, nothing. Most of us would probably just shrug, grab our card, and start walking, right? But Dan puts the card back in and asks to withdraw $200 from his savings. And miraculously, the machine spits out $200 in real physical cash. He didn't have the money. The system literally told him the transaction was canceled, but the cash was right there in his hands.
Dan had essentially stumbled into a massive banking blind spot, and it's actually amazing how simple this exploit was. You see, every single night between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m., the banking network disconnected from the main system to run updates. It went completely blind. So Dan develops a ritual. He waits for that exact offline window. He transfers the phantom funds, he withdraws the real cash. But here's the catch. To stop the bank from catching him during the day when the system's reconnected, he had to cover yesterday's negative balance with an even larger fake transfer the very next night. He was constantly leapfrogging his own debt, like a giant financial yo-yo. He started by taking $1,300 that very first night. By day 12, he was transferring $16,000 just to keep the illusion alive.
Flash forward just a few weeks. Dan walks into his local bank branch and nearly passes out right there on the floor. The teller pulls up his account and just casually mentions his savings balance. It's over $1 million. Just on paper, strictly because of all these overlapping, snowballing, phantom transfers, Dan Saunders is officially a millionaire. He's literally spawned his own personal money tree. The bank's fraud alerts haven't tripped, the cops have absolutely no clue, and he realizes right then and there, this exploit is his and his alone. And Dan didn't just pay off a few late deals and walk away. Oh no. Over the next 5 months, he burned through a staggering $1.6 million. He said later it felt like a caveman discovering fire for the very first time. The adrenaline rush of getting away with it was entirely intoxicating. So he decided he wasn't going to stop. So what exactly does a broke bartender do with $1.6 million in glitch money? We're talking chartering private jets for weekend trips to Bali, booking out entire floors of 5-star luxury hotels. At one downtown nightclub, he dropped $50,000 on a single bar tab, just treating everyone in the VIP section to top-shelf champagne. But the wild thing is, it wasn't all just selfish spending. Dan got this incredible high from giving the money away too. He paid off his friends' university tuitions in full. He wiped out their student loans. And to his family, he lied. He told them he was an investment banker or working in high-end real estate just to cover his tracks. He was living a real-life movie montage, and everyone bought it.
But you know, that kind of illusion can't last forever. One night, they're hanging out in a swanky Melbourne bar, and his close friend Jake grabs Dan's wrist just as he's reaching for his black card to pay. Jake looks him dead in the eye and says, "I know what you're doing. I saw you last week. You're going to prison, mate, and I can't watch it happen." Jake dropped his wrist, turned around, and walked right out the door.
In that exact moment, the music in Dan's head finally stopped. He ordered the most expensive bottle of champagne they had just to push down the feeling. But reality was finally crashing through the facade.
Because every joyride eventually runs out of road, right? By late spring of 2011, Dan hits this massive psychological pivot. The thrill of being the local legend, the guy who always picked up the tab and threw cash around like confetti, that was completely overshadowed by this creeping, silent dread. Logically, he knew there was no way this could go on forever.
This psychological toll became absolutely devastating. Dan's nerves were entirely shot. He started having these vivid nightmares every single night of red and blue police lights flashing through his bedroom window, cops dragging him away. He developed constant, uncontrollable hand tremors and random panic attacks. And his new morning routine? Every single day, he'd wake up and Google his own name alongside the words arrest and fraud. He was jumping at every single shadow. His conscience was just screaming at him after a lifetime of playing by the rules.
Now this is where it gets totally absurd. In a twist of dark, comedic irony, the bank still hadn't caught on. Their fraud department would occasionally call him, but only to confirm his outrageous spending habits. They'd ask, "Sir, did you spend $8,000 at a luxury hotel today?" Dan would just sigh, brace himself, and say yes. And the rep would cheerfully reply, "All right, no worries, just checking. Thanks for your business." No way, right? He is literally living off stolen phantom money, completely eaten alive by paranoia, and the bank is thanking him for being such a great customer.
Finally, in June 2011, the music stops for good. An exhausted, utterly paranoid Dan decides to hit the brakes. One night, he intentionally skips his midnight transfer routine. He just lets the system connect and reveal the truth. Instantly, his account balance plummets into the negative millions. The entire fantasy is laid bare for the bank to see. The very next morning, he picks up the phone and calls his bank manager, his voice shaking. He tries to confess, offering to give whatever cash she has left back. But the manager just cuts him off, totally cold, and says, "Sir, it's a police matter now. We can't discuss this."
So, Dan confesses to the bank manager in June 2011, hangs up the phone, and waits for the sirens. And waits, and waits, but nobody comes. For 2 whole years, from 2011 to 2013, there is nothing but deafening silence. Dan is living in absolute limbo, the guilt just eating him alive, terrified that the cops are just taking their time building this massive, airtight case against him. Ultimately, he can't take the uncertainty anymore. In 2013, Dan literally goes to a major newspaper and goes on national television to spill the whole story. He had to force his own arrest just to end the anxiety. And finally, after practically daring them to do something about it, the police charge him.
When the case finally gets to court, it plays out almost like a sketch comedy. The mechanics of the crime were so bizarre and unusual that the prosecutor seriously struggled to even explain it to the jury. In total bewilderment, the prosecutor actually stood up and said, "He stole money that didn't exist." Even the judge had to stop and ask for clarification twice. The banking exploit was so unprecedented that the legal system barely knew how to process the guy. Dan pleaded guilty, he was genuinely remorseful for what he did, and he was ultimately sentenced to just 1 year in prison, followed by 18 months of community corrections.
It's such a fascinating contrast between Dan's 2 lives. As the secret millionaire, sure, he had the private jets and the endless piles of cash, but it came with this consuming, crushing paranoia. After serving his time, he slips right back into ordinary life as the bartender. On his very first day back at work, a regular recognizes him from the news and slides him a $20 tip across the bar, telling him it's the best tip he'll ever get because it's money he actually earned. Dan agreed. He said it felt like absolution. There were no more luxury suites, no more VIP champagne, just an apron, a bar, and $20 an hour. But he finally had his peace of mind back.
So we wrap up this explainer exactly where we started. If you found the glitch, honestly, when would you have stopped? After $100? $1,000? Or would you have ridden that wave all the way to $1 million too? Dan's fever dream of free money teaches us a really profound lesson about human nature, temptation, and the immense psychological weight of a guilty conscience. Because it is incredibly easy to sit here and say we do the right thing, but when that ATM keeps spitting out hundreds in the dead of night and no one is watching, well, that's the ultimate test, isn't it? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the systems around you, and I'll catch you on the next one.